I stood in the living room of my childhood home, clutching the deed to 47 Maple Avenue in my trembling hands. Outside, spring rain pattered against the windows, reflecting the tears that threatened to spill from my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of a cold, clarifying rage that had been building for decades. What do you mean the wedding is off? My mother, Margaret, stood frozen by the fireplace, her carefully maintained face twisted in disbelief. Even at 65, she refused to let a wrinkle show, though shock was doing what age hadn't managed. I'm not saying the wedding is off, Mom, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm saying it won't be happening here. But this is Claire's home. She protested, her manicured hand fluttering to her throat, a dramatic gesture she'd perfected over the years. No, I said, placing the property deed on the coffee table. This is my home, has been since 2008, when Dad was about to lose it. The look on my mother's face shifted from confusion to horror as realization dawned. Behind her, my father Robert sank into his armchair, suddenly looking every one of his 67 years. My sister Claire stared at the document, her perfect features contorting as her carefully constructed world began to crumble. You're lying, Claire whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. County records don't lie, Claire. I met her eyes with a steadiness I'd spent my whole life trying to find. Maybe it's time none of us did anymore. How had we reached this point? The Richardson family, with our marble floors and crystal chandeliers, our carefully curated image of success and harmony, now facing a truth we'd all spent years avoiding. The truth that I, Sarah Richardson, the daughter they had always overlooked, actually owned the very ground they stood on. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 42 years of seeking their approval, I had finally found my voice. And it had taken losing almost everything, including my self-respect, to find it. Flashback, 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks earlier, I had stood in this same living room with a different kind of tension twisting my stomach. My mother's voice echoed off the high ceilings as she fussed over my clothes. Sarah, darling, you could have at least worn the dress I sent you, she said, adjusting my blazer with disapproving fingers. This is your father's 60th anniversary party, not a business meeting. I stepped away from her touch, a reflexive movement born from years of similar criticisms. I'm comfortable like this, Mom. The house buzzed with the typical Richardson family gathering energy. Fake laughs, clinking glasses, and the constant undercurrent of judgment. I'd helped set up earlier, arranging flowers in the grand entrance and positioning appetizer tables throughout the living room, not because anyone asked me to, but because some part of me still craved their approval. At 42, I was a successful real estate consultant with my own firm. I'd built a life that by all external measures was enviable. Yet standing in my parents' home, the home I'd secretly rescued from foreclosure during the 2008 financial crisis, I felt like I was shrinking back to the insecure girl I'd once been, constantly seeking validation from a family that seemed constitutionally incapable of giving it. Oh my God, is that Michael? My mother's eyes lit up as she spotted him entering through the front door. My stomach dropped. Michael, my ex, the man who disappeared from my life 3 years ago with nothing but a text message and a box of my things left on my doorstep. He looked exactly the same. Tall, perfectly styled dark hair, that disarming smile that had once made my knees weak. Mrs. Richardson, he embraced my mother like he'd never broken her daughter's heart. The house looks amazing, doesn't it? We just had the floors redone, she beamed, conveniently forgetting who had paid for those floors. I turned to escape to the kitchen, but Claire's voice rang out above the party chatter. Everyone, could I have your attention, please? The room fell silent. Claire stood on the bottom step of the grand staircase, radiant in her red designer dress at 36. Michael moved to stand beside her, and my blood ran cold. First, I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate Mom and Dad's anniversary, Claire started, her voice dripping with rehearsed sweetness. But Michael and I have an announcement of our own to make. No, 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 I thought. We're engaged. The room erupted in cheers and congratulations. My father rushed forward to shake Michael's hand. My mother burst into tears of joy. I stood frozen, gripping my champagne glass so tight I thought it might shatter. Isn't it wonderful? My mother grabbed my arm. Your sister getting married. and to Michael of all people. We always loved him. Yeah, I managed. Wonderful. Claire floated through the crowd, showing off her enormous diamond ring. When she reached me, her smile turned razor sharp. What do you think, big sister? He picked it out himself. Bigger than the one he was going to give you, isn't it? I met her eyes, searching for the little sister I'd once read bedtime stories to, the girl who'd come to me crying when she scraped her knees. Instead, I found a stranger who'd spent decades competing with me, a competition I hadn't even known we were having. How long? I asked quietly. How long were you seeing him before we broke up? She laughed, high and false. Oh, Sarah, always so paranoid. Michael and I only got together 6 months after you two ended things. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Looks like I win again, just like always. I watched her glide away, back to our beaming parents and her adoring fiancé. My chest felt tight, but not from heartbreak. No, this was different. This was rage, cold and clarifying. Sarah? It was Julia, my best friend, touching my arm gently. You okay? I need some air. Outside the decision. The night air was cool against my burning cheeks as I walked to my car, my heels clicking against the driveway my money had repaid. I sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine, staring at the house that contained my family, if they could still be called that. Memories flooded back. My graduation day when my mother had criticized my hair instead of congratulating me on being valedictorian. My first major real estate deal when my father had asked if my boss would be upset that I was going out on my own. Claire taking credit for my ideas since we were children, and more recently, Michael, who I genuinely loved, leaving without a proper goodbye. The pattern was suddenly clear, illuminated by Claire's engagement like lightning exposing a landscape at night. I'd spent my entire life seeking approval from people who were constitutionally incapable of giving it. I opened the glove compartment and pulled out the sealed manila envelope I'd been carrying around for months, just waiting for the right moment. Inside was the property deed to 47 Maple Avenue, this very house, the house my parents had nearly lost during the financial crisis, the house I'd secretly bought to save them from foreclosure. I still remember that day in 2008 with perfect clarity. My father sitting at the kitchen table, head in his hands, confessing that they were 3 months behind on mortgage payments. My mother, for once without makeup, her face naked with fear. Claire, 20, dramatically sobbing about having to leave her childhood home. I can help, I'd offered, having just closed my first major real estate deal. Oh, sweetie, this is grown-up business, my mother had said, patting my hand like I was still a child instead of a successful 23-year-old woman. I did help anyway. I bought their house outright, working with my lawyer Richard to structure the deal. They'd been so relieved, so quick to move on once the crisis had passed, that they'd never even read the paperwork. They'd assumed their names would be on the deed because, of course, what daughter would buy her parents' house and put only her name on the title? A daughter who'd spent her life being overlooked, perhaps. A daughter who, even in that moment of rescue, had been diminished. My phone buzzed, a text from Richard. Ready when you are. I smiled, tucking the envelope under my arm. Claire wanted to have her perfect wedding in my house? Fine. But first, she'd learn what it felt like to lose something she thought was hers. Game on, little sister, I whispered, walking back toward the party. Game on. At Richard's office the following day. You should have seen their faces when Claire announced the engagement, I said, pacing across Richard's office. Like they'd completely forgotten Michael was ever with me. Richard looked up from the stack of legal documents on his mahogany desk. At 55, he'd been my lawyer for over 20 years, witnessing both my professional rise and personal disappointments. The silver at his temples added to his air of dignified competence. Are you sure you want to do this, Sarah? There's no going back once we serve these notices. I stopped at the window, watching traffic crawl by 15 stories below. The memory of that day in 2008 flooded back. My father's crumpled face as he admitted they were 3 months behind on mortgage payments, my mother's mascara-stained cheeks, Claire's theatrical sobs about having to leave her childhood home. Do you remember what they said when I offered to help? I asked. Refresh my memory. My mother said, Oh, sweetie, this is grown-up business. I was 23, had just closed my first major real estate deal, and they still treated me like a child. I turned back to face him. Then I bought their house outright, and they never even read the paperwork because they assumed their names would be on the deed. He'd been there, after all, Richard finished, nodding. I watched you sign the papers making you the sole owner of 47 Maple Avenue. My phone buzzed, a text from Julia. Girl, Claire's already posting wedding venue pics of your house. Show me. I called her back, putting her on speaker. Instagram. She's calling it the Richardson family estate and talking about her perfect garden wedding next spring. Richard raised an eyebrow as I pulled up the posts. There was Claire posing in front of my rose garden, Michael's arm around her waist. The caption read, "Where it all began. Can't wait to say I do at my family home." The audacity, I muttered. Sarah, Julia's voice was gentle through the speaker. Are you doing this for justice or revenge? I stared at the photo. Does it matter? It matters to you. I know you. You've spent your whole life trying to prove your worth to them. Make sure this is about freeing yourself, not punishing them. The words hit me harder than I expected. Was this about justice, or was I still trapped in the same old pattern of seeking validation through new means? Richard slid a document across his desk. Speaking of the wedding, they've already filed for event permits, listed your father as the property owner, of course. Of course they did. I picked up the paper, scanning the details. They're planning for 300 guests in my house without asking me. That's fraud, Richard said simply. Can we use that? He nodded. Already drafted a cease and desist. But Sarah, there's something else you should see. He pulled up an email on his computer. Michael's been making inquiries about property rights, specifically about challenging old deed transfers. My stomach clenched. You think he knows? I think he's suspicious. The timing is interesting. Right after getting engaged to Claire, he starts digging into property law. My phone buzzed again, my mother this time. I let it go to voicemail. Play it, Julia said, still on speaker. I want to hear this. I hit play. Sarah darling, we're meeting with the wedding planner tomorrow at the house. I know you're busy with your little real estate thing, but do try to make it. Claire wants to discuss the renovation plans for the kitchen. The countertops simply won't do for the reception. I ended the message. My little real estate thing? That's rich, coming from someone living in a house I bought. Sarah, Julia's voice was firm. Promise me something. What? Promise you won't let this consume you. I've watched you spend years trying to prove yourself to them. Maybe it's time to just let go. I picked up the trespassing notices Richard had prepared. I am letting go. Of them, of their control, of every backhanded compliment and dismissive comment. By throwing them out of my house. Your home, Richard corrected gently. And yes, I continued. Sometimes karma needs a little push. Flashback childhood. My earliest memories are colored with Claire's presence. She was born when I was 6, and from the beginning, she was the family darling. When she was a baby, I'd make funny faces to hear her giggle. I'd read her stories at night, making up voices for each character. You're the best big sister, she'd say, her small hand holding mine as we'd fall asleep. When did it change? Maybe it was gradual, the way erosion slowly transforms a landscape. My mother had always been particular about appearances. A former beauty queen who married up into Boston society, Margaret Richardson measured her worth by her husband's social standing and her daughter's accomplishments, though not in the ways that mattered to me. Claire was naturally sociable, effortlessly charming in a way I never managed to be. While I buried myself in books and later in business plans, she collected friends and admirers like others collected stamps. My parents beamed at her social success, while my academic achievements earned barely a nod. You could try to be more like your sister, my mother would say when I preferred staying in to study rather than attending another meaningless social function. A woman needs more than brains to succeed in this world. By the time I was a teenager, the pattern was set. Claire could do no wrong. I could never quite do right. When I won a scholarship to study business, my father's first question was whether it was a full ride. When I graduated with honors, My mother's primary concern was whether my graduation gown would photograph well. It wasn't that they didn't love me. I believe, in their way, they did. But it was a conditional love, always slightly out of reach, always requiring just a little more effort, a little more conformity to their expectations. Perhaps that's why I pushed myself so hard in my career. Each success was another attempt to prove my worth, to finally earn the unconditional approval I craved. And perhaps that's why, when they nearly lost everything in 2008, I stepped in without hesitation, writing a check that represented most of my savings. The irony that they never even knew the full extent of what I'd done wasn't lost on me. They thought Dad had worked out some arrangement with the bank. He'd been too proud to tell them otherwise, and I'd been too accustomed to being overlooked to correct them. At the meeting. I arrived at the house early, before the wedding planner. Claire was already there, arranging flower samples on my dining room table like she owned the place. "You're late," she said without looking up. "Actually, I'm early." I set my coffee down. "We need to talk about Michael." That got her attention. She straightened, crossing her arms defensively. At 36, Claire still had the beauty that had always made her the center of attention, but now I could see the fine lines of worry around her eyes, the slight hardening of her expression that came with age and disappointment. "There's nothing to talk about. He chose me." "Did he choose you, or did you choose him?" "Oh my God." She rolled her eyes. "Are you still bitter about that?" "It was 3 years ago." I pulled out a chair and sat down, suddenly tired of the games we'd been playing our entire lives. "Remember my high school graduation when you took credit for my valedictorian speech? What does that have to do with anything? Or that time you stole my prom dress and told Mom I was the one who ruined yours?" Claire's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the table. "Ancient history, is it? Because it seems like you're still playing the same games, taking what's mine and calling it a victory." I leaned forward. "Tell me something. Did you know about the house?" A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "What about it? Who owns it?" She waved dismissively. "Dad, obviously." "Why are you being weird?" The doorbell rang before I could respond. My mother burst in, followed by an elegant woman carrying a tablet. Margaret Richardson had aged well, her blonde hair expertly colored to hide any gray, her face subtly maintained by the best cosmetic surgeons in Boston. At 65, she still commanded attention when she entered a room, a skill she'd tried and failed to instill in me. "Sarah, you actually came." Mom's surprise was barely concealed. "And look, you're not wearing black for once." The wedding planner introduced herself as Marina and immediately began spreading magazines across my table. "Now, I've been thinking about the layout, the ceremony in the garden, cocktail hour on the terrace, and the reception flowing through the main floor. We'll need to update those awful kitchen counters," my mother interjected, "and that chandelier in the foyer. It's not quite right for photos." "The chandelier stays," I said quietly. "Don't be difficult, Sarah," Claire sighed. "This is my wedding in my family home." "Your family home?" I repeated, the words feeling strange in my mouth. Three heads turned to stare at me. "What did you say?" my mother asked, but before I could respond, the front door opened again. Diane, my godmother, walked in, her timing impeccable as always. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she said, taking in the scene. Diane had been my mother's best friend in college, but unlike my mother, she'd built her life on substance rather than appearance. At 63, her silver hair was worn in a stylish bob, her face lined with the evidence of a life fully lived. She'd been more of a mother to me than my own in many ways, the one person who saw me clearly. "Sarah, could I borrow you for a moment?" In the kitchen, Diane poured herself a glass of water. "I saw the legal notices on Richard's desk yesterday. Are you here to talk me out of it?" "No," she said thoughtfully. "I'm here to remind you that karma works both ways, sweetheart. Make sure your actions come from justice, not hatred." From the dining room, I could hear Claire's voice rising. "And we'll need to clear out that ugly office upstairs for the bridal suite." "My office," I muttered. Diane touched my arm. "You were always the strong one, you know, even as a little girl." When Claire would break her toys, you'd give her yours just to keep the peace. Not anymore. No, she agreed. Not anymore. But strength isn't just about standing up for yourself, Sarah. It's about knowing why you're doing it. We returned to find my mother and Claire deep in renovation plans. Marina was sketching something on her tablet. Oh, good, my mother said. Sarah, we need you to clear out your things from the upstairs office by next week. The contractors are coming too. No, I said. Excuse me? No. My voice was quiet but firm. No contractors, no renovations, no wedding. The confrontation present, Claire snatched the property deed from the coffee table. Her face went pale as she scanned the document. This has to be fake. Check the county records, I said calmly. I've owned this house since 2008, when Dad was about to lose it to the bank. Remember when you all said I couldn't possibly understand grown-up business? My mother's hand flew to her throat. But Robert said, Dad never read the paperwork. None of you did. You just assumed. Marina cleared her throat awkwardly. Perhaps I should come back another time. No need, I said. There won't be a wedding here. The room fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, another piece I'd paid to restore without acknowledgement. Claire's face twisted into something ugly. You can't do this to me, she suddenly shouted. Like you couldn't keep Michael. Like you couldn't handle being less loved, less wanted. You've always been jealous, she spat. Because I'm getting everything you wanted. I looked at my sister, really looked at her perhaps for the first time in years. Behind the perfect makeup and designer clothes, I saw something unexpected. Fear. Fear and a desperate need for validation that mirrored my own with unsettling accuracy. No, Claire, I said softly. I'm getting what I wanted, the truth. And the truth is, this house is mine. The truth is, you've been competing with me your entire life for a prize I never even knew we were fighting for. Sarah, my mother pleaded, be reasonable. This is your sister's special day. From the doorway, Diane spoke up. I believe Sarah is being perfectly reasonable. It's her house, after all. My father, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. I never meant for it to be like this. His voice sounded old, defeated. When you bought the house, I was going to tell them, but then. Time passed. 17 years passed, Dad, I said, not unkindly. 17 years of letting them think you saved the family, while I stood in the background, invisible as always. You bought our house? My mother's voice was barely a whisper, the implications slowly dawning on her. When you were 3 months behind on the mortgage. When the bank was about to foreclose. When Dad's investments had failed. I looked at Claire. When your college tuition was still being paid despite there being no money to pay it. Claire sank into a chair, the property deed still clutched in her hand. I never knew, she whispered. All these years. No one did, I said. That was the problem. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Your father was in the records office this morning looking up the deed. I showed the message to my father. Interesting timing, Dad. Right after the engagement announcement. He had the grace to look ashamed. Michael. He might have mentioned something about legal options. Of course he did. I turned to Claire. Did you know your fiancé has been researching property law, specifically how to challenge old deed transfers? Claire's eyes widened. What? Michael has been looking into ways to contest my ownership of this house. I suspect he knew, or at least suspected, long before today. Claire's phone began to ring. Michael's name flashed on the screen. She stared at it, then silenced the call. I don't understand, my mother said, looking lost. If you own the house, why didn't you say something before? It was a question I'd asked myself many times. Because part of me was still that little girl desperate for your approval. Because I thought if I just did enough, gave enough, achieved enough, eventually you'd see me. Tears filled my mother's eyes, real tears, not the theatrical ones she'd perfected for social occasions. Sarah, we always saw you. No, Mom. You saw what you wanted to see. A daughter who didn't quite fit your mold. A backup plan in case Claire failed to fulfill your dreams. That's not true. But the protest lacked conviction. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my business? When was the last time you remembered I'm allergic to shellfish before ordering catering? When was the last time any of you treated me like I mattered as much as Claire? The silence that followed was answer enough. Claire looked up, her mascara smudged from unexpected tears. I always thought you had everything, she said quietly. You were so smart, so capable. Mom and Dad were always comparing me to you. Why can't you get grades like Sarah? Why can't you be responsible like your sister? I stared at her in disbelief. Are we talking about the same childhood? You never needed their approval like I did, Claire continued. You had your own path. Do you know how terrifying it is to have a sister who seems perfect? I took Michael because I wanted to prove I could have something you wanted, something you valued. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All these years, while I'd been striving for approval, Claire had been doing the same, each of us thinking the other was the favored one. My father cleared his throat. We never meant to pit you against each other. No, Diane said from the doorway. But you did. And now you all have a choice to make about what happens next. 3 months later, epilogue. The garden at 47 Maple Avenue was in full bloom, roses climbing trellises, hydrangeas exploding in blue and purple clouds. I sat on the patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was still strange to think of this place as truly mine, to embrace ownership not just of the property, but of my place in the world. After the confrontation, things had changed not miraculously, not completely, but significantly. Claire and Michael had broken up after she discovered he'd known about the house ownership all along and had pursued her partly for access to what he thought was family property. Her heartbreak had been real, but also clarifying. For the first time in our adult lives, we'd had honest conversations, painful but necessary. My parents had moved to a condo downtown, an adjustment my mother especially was still struggling with. My father had finally admitted to years of financial mismanagement and a pride that had prevented him from acknowledging my help. They were trying, in their way, to make amends, my mother less critical, my father more honest. We were all learning a new language of family, one word at a time. The sound of the garden gate opening pulled me from my thoughts. Claire walked up the path, carrying a bottle of wine. Sorry I'm late, she said, setting the bottle on the table. Client meeting ran over. After the breakup, she decided to go back to school, pursuing the marketing degree she'd abandoned years ago to follow a boyfriend. Now she was interning at an agency, starting over at 36 with a humility that would have been unimaginable months ago. It's fine, I said, pouring us each a glass. How's the new apartment? Small? Noisy? Mine. She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. I never lived alone before, you know? Always with roommates or boyfriends, or back with mom and dad. It's scary, but good. I nodded, understanding completely. Independence usually is. I've been thinking, Claire said, her finger tracing the rim of her wine glass, about selling my car to pay for next semester's tuition. You love that car. I love not being dependent more. She looked up at me. I spent my whole life taking the easy way out, Sarah. Taking what I wanted without earning it. I don't want to be that person anymore. The admission touched me deeply. I could help, with tuition. I know you could. But I need to do this myself. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I need to be more like my big sister. The words were a balm to old wounds, not fully healed but no longer festering. What about you? Claire asked. Are you really going to convert the east wing into those apartments? I nodded. 3 units for transitional housing. Women getting back on their feet after divorce or domestic violence. It had been Julia's suggestion, a way to use my financial security and this too large house for something meaningful. The foundation should be up and running by fall. Mom still scandalized at the idea of those people living in her house, Claire said with a small laugh. But she'll come around. It's not her house, I reminded her gently. It's mine, and I get to decide what it means now. The Richardson House Women's Foundation would be my legacy, something built from the pain of the past, but looking toward a different future. Not perfect, not without complications, but authentic in a way our family had never managed to be. As the evening deepened around us, Claire and I talked about small things, her classes, my business, a movie we'd both seen. It wasn't the relationship of my childhood dreams, but it was real. And at 42, I'd finally learned that reality, with all its messiness and imperfection, was worth far more than the glossy illusions I'd chased for so long. The house stood solid behind us, no longer a symbol of what I'd lost or what I'd secretly held, but of what might still be built on foundations strong enough to weather any storm.